Okay, well, we'll go through our agenda real fast. We'll do a couple introductions, and then we'll talk about what is planning, what kind of problems does it solve, how does it solve those problems, who does what inside of an organization as it pertains to this product. How long does it take to implement one? What's your average type of implementation? And once we get through the short PowerPoint deck, then I would like to spend the majority of the time just showing you guys what it does. So we'll go through a demo of PBCS and get a look around, and then I have Q&A at the very end. But honestly, my preference would be for you guys to ask questions all the way through. So if you have any kind of a question that seems to pertain to what I'm talking about at that moment in time, please ask, because somebody else is probably thinking it anyway. So my name is Brian Marshall. I work for a company called US Analytics. I'm our VP of Delivery. I've been doing EPM and IT related things for about 20 years, specifically in the EPM side of things for around 15 years. I've been presenting at Kscope since nearly the beginning of time, since 2010. And I blog a lot, less lately, but more in general. And my blog is epmmarshall.com. See that clever play on my name? That's awesome, right? You guys do not seem impressed. That's okay. It's corny, I know. So about the company that I work for. So we're a Dallas-based group, Hyperion focused. So planning, HFM, Essbase, that whole set of products. Some of the data integration tools as well. We've got around 65 people, and we've had over 1,000 successful client engagements. We're a regional firm, so most of our business is going to be in this region. So we focus specifically on TOLA, but we also have projects on the East Coast, the West Coast, up north and down south. So we go outside of the region, but we are very regionally focused. That's where most of our people are. We are a full service organization, so we have all of the services on the left and all of the solutions on the right that I will not read to you and be very boring. So let's get into the meat of what we're here to talk about today. So what is planning or PBCS? So Hyperion Planning comes in two different flavors. It comes in the cloud version and the on-prem version. So if you guys haven't noticed a theme at Oracle, the cloud version is probably the one that matters the most, because that's all they want to sell you anyway. And it's also going to be the version of the product that's going to get the most updates. It's going to be the newest, nicest technology. So what is planning or PBCS? It's a web-based and an Excel-based planning and budgeting tool. So it's the whole goal is to try and bring your planning and budgeting forecast out of Excel and into a centralized repository and into a centralized process. So instead of just focusing on the data, it also focuses on the entire process of your plan. So who approves what and who's responsible for what, and how do we secure things to make sure that a spreadsheet doesn't get sent to the wrong person with everybody in the company's salary. Things like that, because that's never happened to anybody in this room, I bet. So we also want to try and eliminate the need for sharing a bunch of templates like that, having things emailed accidentally, or just the overhead that comes along with having that many different spreadsheets. I have a client that has 1,100 spreadsheets they use right now to do their forecasting process. And they have one in a macro that generates the rest of them, and then they send it out, and then they have to consolidate all of those. It takes 2 weeks, and now they're ready to do it the next month, 2 weeks later. So they don't spend a whole lot of time looking at the data. They spend a whole lot of time in the data, trying to get the data. And that's kind of the goal, is to get you out of Excel and as an input mechanism and into Excel as an analysis tool. Because anybody can do input and things like that in Excel, but if you can start analyzing your data and instead of spending 80% of your time getting your data and 20% of your time looking at your data, flip that around. That's kind of the goal behind planning and PBCS, to get you looking at the data and making better decisions about the data instead of just spending all of your time trying to go get the data and consolidate the data. It also provides a lot of companies with the ability to even do a monthly forecast. A lot of companies out there do an annual plan, and then they might redo it a couple of times throughout the year, but they just don't have time to take their process, because it's so unwieldy, to take it out of Excel and do that every single month. So they're really operating on a plan with a little bit of adjustment all the way out throughout the year. How many of you do an annual plan? Everyone, right? I hope. Yeah. How many of you do a monthly one? See how many less hands went up when we asked that question. So less than half are doing the forecast. And so just for anybody in the group, what's a reason why you don't do it monthly? Anyone? Takes too much time, so you do it quarterly. That's a good reason. Quarterly is not bad. So it's July and you've almost finalized the annual plan and now you can't really get back to doing that. That makes sense too. And that's another area where we can try and help with that, because if you've got the approval process that goes all the way through and you have that visibility throughout the process, you're not waiting until the very end to say, we need to adjust that, push it back down, and now redo your entire thing again. So try and put some of the process around what you do on a daily basis so that it's a little bit easier to get through that. The other goal is to make sure we centralize everything. So instead of inputting everything in templates that you send out to everybody, let them just input the data directly into the system. So instead of doing a bunch of calculations in a spreadsheet and then having somebody muck with that spreadsheet and change it for their calculations, why don't we go through and instead just have all those calculations be done in one place? Currency conversion is a big one. It sounds like low-hanging fruit, and from a consultant's perspective it is, but I have a lot of clients that have a rates tab, and that rates tab gets updated every month with the new rates so that they can then blow out their forecast in a different way of doing things inside of their spreadsheet. How many of you do that? Anyone? Nobody? Okay. Spoken like an admin.
You gotta have that tab to upload to
Yeah, they're in there somewhere. And then really the whole goal at the end of the day, I say Excel a lot, and this is a stupid buzzword, but it's accurate. Most of you live in Excel hell when it comes to planning and budgeting and forecasting. You spend a lot of time in Excel doing things that you really don't want to be doing in there because you have to and you don't have a better way of doing it. So that's really what it's trying to do. The other things that it can help you with is providing what-if analysis. So instead of having to do like 17 different versions of your one spreadsheet, let's just give you another version inside of the tool that allows you to make some changes and kind of see how it flows to the model. It also provides the concept of top-down and bottoms-up. So most companies operate in a bottoms-up method, right? They fill in all their things and then roll them up eventually. But a lot of companies now have gotten to where with technology we can say, hey, we know the target is this, push it down, and then let somebody come tell me how we're actually going to get to that target. So at the top, at an executive level, I get to set the goal, but then I have to go through at the lower level and actually meet that goal. That's a lot easier to do when the system tells us where we need to go. Another cool part about planning and PBCS versus Excel in general is security. So not only can we secure the data itself and around metadata, and if you're in HFM and things like that, I'm sure you already understand how you can secure that, but we can actually take it a step further and we can apply security at the individual object level. And what's an object? So like an input form. I can say users either have access to it or they don't have access to it. So that we can really, on a per user, on a per group basis, we can define the user experience a lot better so that when users come in, there's not just a million things to look at. They go look at the things that user needs to have access to. And now one of the things that it's solved better in the last 18 to 24 months than it ever has previously is dashboarding and kind of that executive view. Because one of the things planning has always kind of struggled at is how do I get my data out of planning in a graphical form? Well, we've had OBIEE in the past and now we've got BICS and a lot of other tools, but now planning has a lot better built-in functionality that means we don't have to take the data out of planning to use it for visualization purposes. Now we can just do it inside of the tool. So one less thing we have to go to another system, one less integration, one less path that might fail or be inaccurate. So how does it solve these problems? It's really made up of 4 main ingredients. We have a web service that provides a website for you to go do a lot of things like input data and see forms and stuff like that. That web service also provides an interface for how we access things inside of Excel itself. On the back end, we've got two different database technologies. We've got a relational database, which is just your typical Oracle database, your SQL Server database, and then we also have an Essbase database. So I know you're in an introduction to planning and a lot of you already have planning. How many of you have Essbase already? Pretty much everybody has Essbase, right? So Essbase is on the back end doing all of the numerical heavy lifting. And really, a lot of companies today, and a lot of you may even be using Essbase for your repository. So you're already doing a lot of the calculations and things like that matter for your forecast inside of Essbase, but the process still lives entirely in Excel. So you're kind of halfway there, and the last half is where planning really excels, and that's what the relational database kind of supports. And then the last ingredient, and probably the most important one, is the SmartView add-in for Microsoft Office. And one of the big benefits is if you're on Essbase and you're used to the Excel add-in, how many of you use the Excel add-in? How many of you use SmartView? See, it's still about 50-50, which is kind of scary because the SmartView add-in hasn't been supported since 11.122, which is a really long time ago in Hyperion Ease. Yes, what did I say? I said SmartView add-in, of course I did. So yes, the Excel add-in hasn't been supported in a very long time, but still so many people use it. One of the big benefits of the SmartView add-in is that it's not just an Excel add-in. It also works in Word, it works in PowerPoint, it even works in Outlook for those of you that use the task functionality inside of Outlook. I don't know if anybody actually does that, but it will do it. So who does what when it comes to a tool like Planning or PBCS? And I think it depends. A major question is, are you going to go on cloud or on-prem? So as you guys are looking at the different products that are out there and you're trying to decide what you want to look at, how many of you are interested in on-premise Hyperion Planning? How many of you are interested in PBCS? Interesting. That's an interesting mix. So my demo may be a little bit different for some of you than you might want to see. But they both solve the same problem with the same core technology. It's just going to be a slightly different interface. So who generally owns a planning application? Generally it's going to be finance, accounting, or some operational group. We're starting to see planning be used more and more from an operational perspective, not just for your typical balance sheet, income statement, cash flow type of planning. And then who uses the application? You know, this one can be a really big open question. I have clients that have 25 licenses. I have clients that have 2,500 licenses. So it's all going to depend on what level in your organization you can get user adoption to work at. And that varies heavily. You know, a lot of clients have 2,500 retail stores and they don't have any desire to have a store manager do that because they're not going to do it anyway. But they can still take advantage of it. So there's going to be a big wide variety of users on an application like this. So who administers the application? Alice. You administer the application and other admins like her. So people that are already administering EPM systems, a lot of companies will have somebody just in IT that does that, somebody just in finance or accounting that does that, and some companies have one of each. You know, in an ideal world, I would love to have one of each, one in IT, one in finance, and they work together instead of working against each other, which can happen a lot depending on how your IT group feels about everybody else or vice versa. So how long does an implementation usually take? So if you're doing planning, meaning actual budgeting and forecasting, and you're doing basic income statement, not a whole lot around balance sheet and cash flow, that typical project is going to be about a 12-week project, 3 months. Now, can you implement it faster than that? Sure, but you're not going to get a whole lot out of the product beyond basic analysis. It's going to be more like an S-based cube that you happen to use planning to create if you try and go much faster than that. And then there are other things that can make it take longer too. Like, do you want to do financial statement planning if you're on the ePBCS side of the world? Do you want to do workforce planning, which exists on both the cloud and on-prem? Do you want to do CapEx? And then there's operational planning, which operational planning can be shorter or it can be way longer depending on how you do things and what scale you're really looking at. You know, if you're Walmart, it might take a little longer to do an implementation just because of the sheer mass of an application versus somebody that has 1,000 employees. So what about software costs? And these are all list prices, but for the cloud, PBCS is basically, for the base level PBCS, it's $120 per user per month. And they're normally going to make you sign a pretty long contract. You know, 3 years is kind of the average. But you should never, ever pay list price. So if you pay that price, you were probably doing it wrong or have a really bad Oracle sales rep that you should fire. And then $250 a month if you're going to do the bigger PBCS, which is ePBCS, that has workforce and CapEx and project financial planning and a bunch of other components, including strategic planning now as well. And on-prem is a little bit more straightforward. It's $3,500 a user up front, list, again, never pay that. Plus your 20% annual maintenance, and that's roughly the cost. Now there are other components you can add on to that. You can add workforce planning, I think it's $300 a user. You can add CapEx, again, I think it's $300 a user, and project financial planning, I can't remember what the list price on that one is. And then there's also the data pieces of it. So if you look at PBCS, it actually comes with a built-in scaled back version of FDMEE that works directly with PBCS. If you look at on-prem, you have to either use S-based load rules, which a lot of you are already probably familiar with if you have an S-based application anyway, or you can implement FDMEE, which is another way to do it, but that would be an additional cost. So let's talk a little bit about cloud versus on-prem before we actually get into a live demo. So there are a lot of pros and cons for both sides of this coin. The biggest pro right now for the cloud is if you look at all of the development effort that's going into the planning stack, whether it's planning or PBCS, all that money is going directly into the cloud. So when you look at on-prem, yeah, Oracle can go through and say, hey, we're gonna support on-prem until 2030. I have no doubt that that's the case. But support and have new functionality are two very different things. And the other thing that Matt doesn't talk about is how are the sales reps comped? So if I'm an Oracle sales rep and I'm selling you software, it does me no good to sell you on-prem planning because I get $0 for that. So that tells you kind of where Oracle's really heading just based on how they comp their salespeople. And if I'm not getting comped for HFM, I want you to buy FCCS. Even if it doesn't fit your organization because I don't get comped on HFM, it doesn't matter to me. It might as well not exist. So another benefit is it's far less IT centric. So now I don't have to rely on IT for my infrastructure. Really, technically speaking, if I wanted to, I can just, as a business unit, as long as I can pay Oracle, I can go buy it and have it set up and be using it, and IT never even has to know that I did it. That's probably not the right way to do it, but you can do it that way. And it's great if you have if you're a company that prefers doing OpEx versus CapEx. So if you don't depreciate everything and you really just want to pay a monthly fee, then it's great because I don't have this big upfront charge. I mean, if I buy 1,000 users of PBCS, it's whatever I pay a month, although Oracle will still want you to pay it in advance if they can get it. Versus on planning, I don't have a choice. It's $3,500. If I do 1,000 users, I'm paying $3.5 million minus whatever discount Oracle gives me all up front. So that's good and it's bad depending on how your organization operates. The downsides to the cloud are really where you lose control and kind of visibility. So you don't get any control over your infrastructure at all, right? You're on an Oracle device with Oracle supported as software as a service. You can't even get access to the systems. It is what you get. You get the application and nothing else. You also lose Active Directory integration without IT support. And even when you do get Active Directory authentication or whatever your chosen vendor is for authentication, it's still not real Active Directory integration. So, you know, when I go into shared services and I go into on-prem, I can actually use Active Directory groups to manage roles and provision things. I can't do that in the cloud. In the cloud, it is an authentication method. It is not a security management method. So keep that in mind as you're looking at your options. And this is a big one for a lot of companies. Not everybody wants to be on someone else's hardware. A lot of people still like to keep their financial information, that information on the cloud, based on the number of off the cloud. Based on the number of hands I saw go up for on-prem versus on the cloud, there might be a lot of you in that category in this room. So what about on-prem? So one of the biggest pros I like about on-prem is I actually get to buy the software as opposed to renting it from Oracle into eternity. Now I'm still going to pay support if I want the newest features, but if I decide that I don't want to pay support anymore, as long as I'm content with the version that I'm on, I can keep running it forever because I own the software. You also get complete control over your infrastructure. So if you want to do whatever you want to do with Active Directory or any kind of LDAP authentication, you can control that and use it as you please. And you get complete access to the back-end systems. So I have a lot of clients that use the planning repository extensively to do other things. Well, I can't do that in the cloud. So I don't have any access to that. I can't do an S-based load rule in the cloud. I have to go through data management. So you lose a lot of that control and flexibility when you go to the cloud, but you also gain a lot of features. So what are the downsides to on-prem? So I think the biggest downside is really that Oracle just wants you to forget that this product exists so that you will go to the cloud, because that's what helps Oracle's bottom line. And when you look at Oracle's stock price, it was up 9% in one day because they had such growth in the cloud. That's what they care about. They don't care if on-prem is the right thing for you. All they care is what their stock price is doing. And there's also been very little new functionality in the last 24 months. So if you look at PBCS, there are features in PBCS that have been there for almost 3 years that are still not in on-prem. And if you listen to Matt Bradley on when 11.2 is coming out, which is probably going to have the majority of those features, we're 18 months away from that, if we're lucky. Which means by the time those features finally get there, we're going to be almost 5 years behind PBCS in functionality. That's a pretty stark contrast in a technology field. I mean, 5 years is an eternity, and that's what we're saying it's going to take for on-prem to catch up to where we are today, 2 years from now, today on the cloud. So that's a pretty That's pretty disappointing if you want to go on-prem. And then the last one, it does require IT sets up servers for you and maintains those servers. So you have the additional cost and maintenance and care and feeding that goes into having IT infrastructure, which for some of you may be a benefit, especially if you're on the IT side. You may like that. All right, so that's enough about talking about the product. Yes, question? So that's kind of true and kind of not. So one of the things you can do, I've had the benefit of working, one of our sales rep is an ex-Oracle rep. So I've had the benefit of hearing the different ways you can go around that, because that's a big concern. It's $120. I will tell you it's been $120 a user per month since it started, and that was over 3 years ago now. It hasn't gone up yet, so that's encouraging, but that doesn't help you if from a contractual perspective. So most Oracle contracts, if it's not already in there, ask them, and the Oracle sales rep can put in basically a ceiling on how much it can go up. Doesn't have to go up that much, but when you sign a contract, it's going to probably be for 3 years, which is going to lock you in for 3 years regardless. Sometimes it'll be for 5 years, and you'll get the lock. Basically, whatever your initial contract is going to be, it's going to be locked in. At the end of that is where they can adjust it, and that's where you want to make sure that there is basically not to exceed X percent of the cost that I originally licensed it at. You can get that put in there. So just as being an educated buyer, so that's a really great question. Being an educated buyer will help you on that, knowing that they can put that in there if it's not already in there. Any other questions? That was a great question. All right, so why don't we break out and actually see what planning or PBCS might look like. All right, so I'm going to log into PBCS and hope that the internet down here still works. Although I bet it's pretty awesome right now because nobody's here anymore. the few, the proud, the last session at Kscope. So we're going to log in as Henry, who's our sales manager for this mythical PBCS using company that has an application called Vision. Now this is going to be similar when you buy PBCS, you can actually set up a sample application called Vision when you get it out of the box. This is going to be similar to that, but a lot more built out than the actual demo that comes with the product. So when you log in, how many of you have used or have seen or are currently using an Oracle Cloud product today? Wow, that is interesting. So very, very few of you. So when you log into the cloud, you're going to get an interface that looks just like every other Oracle Cloud product. So this is they call it the simplified interface for planning, and you can actually see a very similar interface in 11.124 to this. So what I'm showing you is not going to be completely foreign. What's that? That is not me. That is Henry, the mythical sales manager. So yeah, no, I don't look like that at all. It's the tie. That's the only difference. So this kind of tells us a little bit about who we're logged in as, what application we're currently signed into, and then it gives us a little picture if we have one set up. And then it can show us announcements that our administrator wants us to see. So our announcement here is telling us, hey, here is your plan, here are some due dates that you need to be aware of, just a way to communicate with your end users about things that are going on inside of the system and who they need to contact. This is a working number, I promise. So once we get through that, over off to the right, you'll see the actual tiles that matter. One of the cool parts about the simplified interface, and it seems like a gimmick until you try it, it also works on a tablet. So if you have a touchscreen or if you have an iPad, this same consistent interface works on pretty much every device you can think of. And what that means is if I'm in the field and I'm a user and I still have to enter data and the only application left is I have to have Excel to do my budget, or otherwise I could be completely on the iPad, I don't need it anymore because now I can actually use this on an iPad. And I have a variety of retailers that love that because they have store managers that or district and regional managers that go from location to location. They don't want to carry a laptop around anymore. So having a touch-driven interface, an interface that allows us to really be cross-platform works great. Yes? It works great on the phone. So it'll work on your phone, it'll work on your iPad, and it does not require an application is the cool part. So you just log in, and this is one of the big benefits of the cloud versus on-prem that I didn't talk about. On the on-prem, if I want to, this interface exists. It's not quite like this. It's very similar, But if I want an end user to be able to see this, I either have to give them the ability to VPN on their device, which is kind of hard on phones and iPads. If you've tried that on your corporate device, it's a pain. Or I have to open up Workspace or the simplified interface through my firewall, which if you're in IT, you know that's never going to happen. And if you worked at IT, you have an idea that it's probably never going to happen. Versus the cloud, it's just there. So this is our instance of PBCS. I'm connected through our internet connection. I can pull this up on my phone, if it would work with the projector, and do just fine. So that's a huge benefit when you're trying to give it to field users, is it gives you a little bit more flexibility of not having to be VPN'd in every time you want to do something. So if we click on one of our tiles, maybe go into our financial plan, we can see kind of the next level of things that we can do. So we can go through and plan our revenue, plan our expenses, see a financial statement when we get done with those, do some analysis, do some reporting, approve submit it for approval, and then take a look at forecast when we get done. So let's kind of start with revenue and see what that gives us. That is a great question that you could ask Oracle. The question is, why does it look like an iPhone? I think part of that is they are trying to make it more universal from a device perspective. So if I'm on a phone, I need something big enough that my finger will be able to touch. And Workspace, if you've used the Workspace interface on any of the other EPM products, good luck. You will spend all day trying to hit the navigate button. At least I do. I have big hands. So for me, it's like, okay, if I push it enough times, I'll eventually get there. So I think they're trying to make the interface more flexible across platform. Because again, if I open this up on my phone, it looks exactly like this on my phone. And to me, that's beneficial because that's way less training that I have to worry about as an administrator or a consultant that I have to do with end users. Because I do the training for one on their PC, it's the exact same training for somebody on their iPad. It's the exact same training for somebody that wants to do it on their phone. So that's all really good from my perspective. So if we open up revenue, we'll see just a basic, simple revenue model. And this revenue model is going to be units and average selling price with a margin component. So this is a pretty simple hardware sales type of plan. If I sell widgets, this is great. And you'll notice at the top we have something called our point of view. And our point of view gives us the ability to do two things. Number one, I'm a sales manager because I'm Henry, the guy up top, that I don't look like. So I'm Henry. I only see things that Henry should be able to see. So I see sales because I'm the sales manager. So I can see all of the different sales things. Well, I'm over sales, but I really only see sales east. Sales east is what I'm responsible for actually planning for at this point in the process. So when I go there, you'll notice that instead of just, that's interesting. So on your screen, this is a little bit gray if you can't tell. And these boxes are a little bit white. So on this screen, where the contrast is a little bit better, you'll see a clear difference. So on your device, you'll see a clear difference between what's on the projector and what's actually on the screen. But what this tells me is if it's white, I can input to it. So I can go in and say, you know what, in January, I'm going to put a bigger number. I want to see 300. And when I enter that in, it's going to update all of my numbers. So it did 300. Now it's calculating it by $640 per unit and calculating $165,000. And then it's doing the 25% margin and calculating that as well. So all of that happens when I enter data. So now I can do my entire revenue plan in one form that I just send out to a bunch of users. And if we look up at the top, we're doing this based on entity and based on product. So I can send this same form out to all of my users, and based on their security, they're only going to be able to update the things that they need to be able to update. So what may have been a series of 300 forms where I had, or 300 Excel templates, where I had all my different sales regions that I have to send it to, and then for each of those sales regions, it has a tab for each of the products that are listed under here. Now I can send one, maintain one, and only use one form for all of those things. So we're already starting to get away from Excel hell right there. The other thing is we don't have any calculations in those templates that we're sending out anymore, right? So when I go in, if I want to change the way I do average selling price, or if I want to change the way that margin is calculated to do something more, a little more accurate than just throwing a percentage out there, I can change it on the system and not have to go back to the users to get additional information. Or more importantly, the users can't go in and mess around with it and do their own margin calculation, and maybe we don't catch it because we're consolidating spreadsheets and we don't have time to go see what they did in each individual formula. Question? Absolutely, yeah. So pretty much all of the functionality that you're going to see today is pretty well in OnPrem. It'll look a little bit different than this, and there's a couple of things that you'll see on the dashboarding. Dashboarding exists on-prem, but it's not quite as good as it is on here, so there's not quite as many visualization options. You get only a few charts and graphs versus what you have in this one, which will look a lot prettier. Alice?
So when you typed in 300, did it automatically send it to the database? Or
It did. So it actually submits it to the database, and it actually ran a business rule on the back end that calculated and stored that $165,000 value at the bottom. So it did all of that without the user even being aware that it's doing it. On this form, yeah, you can hit return, and it depends. There are settings. You can turn off the settings that automatically submit. So I can have it to where I go enter my data, and as a user, I click save, and then it does everything. Because especially if you have like a business rule that takes a long time to run for everything on the form, I don't necessarily want to enter it, wait, enter it, wait, enter it, wait. So you do have the capability of modifying that user experience a little bit. I saw another hand.
Yeah, that was getting at my question. Do you have the ability to take business rule off the form and put just a calculation so it's done completely and run it?
Absolutely. So the question is, can you take it completely off the form and just have them run it when they get done? One of the things we can do is we can give the end users the ability, we can take it completely off the form. If you look at the form itself, there's actually several different ways to run a business rule. I can run a business rule when I load the form for the first time. So if I don't want to go pre-seed the entire cube all at once because it takes too long, I only want to do it when that user loads it up for the first time. I can actually have it execute that command as they come in. I can load it on save. I can load it. So you have a couple of different options on when those business rules get kicked off and what business rules get kicked off and what order they get kicked off. And then we can also add it to like a task list so that they go in and we don't ever execute it automatically. We just have them say, when I get done with this step, the next step is to calculate the database. Click here to do it. And the cool part about business rules and where planning really differentiates itself from just Essbase is a business rule is context aware. And what I mean by that is it knows that I am in Sales East on product X. So when it runs that business rule, it runs a calc script that is targeted for that intersection only. So instead of, if this was Essbase and I had a template and I wanted it to do that when I click save, it would actually, number one, I'd have to use VBA to get it to kick it off. And number two, when it actually runs, it would run for the entire intersection. Now it's a little better now in 11.124, but there are some bugs in the way that 11.124 calc scripts with parameters work that business rules are way, way better. You'll also notice at the very bottom we also even have a graph. Yes? Oh, I'm sorry.
For the security-wise, if I only had access to one of the products, would I still see the entire list, or will I just see
No, I will. So the question is, if I have security and I only have access to one product, will I see all of the products or only the one I have access to? The answer is you will only see the one you have access to. So you can kind of get there in Essbase when you do a meta read filter, but it's much better in planning because it doesn't show you things. So you don't even really have to worry about the no access, pound no access or anything like that. You really won't get that very often in planning because it's aware of what your security is and filtering it appropriately. So I'm only going to really see in planning things that I should see. And that's one of the great parts about the flexibility of the security there versus what we have in just Essbase. Any other questions? All right. So another thing you'll notice is that we can expand in and out on this so that we can kind of see, and I'm trying to, there we go. So we can actually expand this in and out, and we can create a form that starts up at total year and then have the users drill in. So we have a lot of different options for how we design this form. You'll also notice that we can have as many dimensions on this form as we want to. So we can, if we have 10 dimensions, all 10 dimensions can be in the form for entry. Say that one more time. It will eventually. So the comment was it might affect performance. One of the cool parts about how it does a query to Essbase inside of planning, on the screen. Now this is for inside the web interface. In SmartView, it's going to go get everything and bring it back. In the web, it actually, depending on the number of rows and columns, it only brings back by default 20 columns and 50 rows. So then, as you start to scroll, it loads the next 20 columns to the next 50 rows, and then the next, and then the next. So from a performance perspective, it's actually not all that bad. And the benefit, in SmartView it doesn't matter as much anyway because the overhead in SmartView is very low because it's just using Excel to display it. Versus when we do it inside of the web, we have the entire interface that's being built by the web browser, which is a huge bottleneck for performance. So they try and limit the amount of information that the browser has to process at any given time. And it's flexible, so you can change the number of rows and columns that it loads on default. So if you have one and you want it to load everything every time because you have great computers and great internet access, then you can do that. There's no problem doing that. So one of the other cool features that's built into a product like Planning is time aware. So it knows the difference between a quarter and a month and a year. So instead of me going in and saying, you know what, I want to adjust April, May, and June to get to my Q2 number, maybe I just go in and say, you know what, instead of 761 units, I think I'm going to sell 1,000. When I put that in there, it's going to automatically take 310, 197, and 254, and based on the amount that's in that bucket, it's going to automatically push it down. So when I enter 1,000, it automatically adjusts all of those numbers in, so I can see now I'm at 1,000, but it still keeps each piece of the pie the same. So the question is, do you have to tell it how to do that? You do not. So the period dimension is one of the standard built-in dimensions, so it is aware of the information that we're asking for. If I don't have anything in here, so say all three of those were blank, then it will do, so there's the concept of a spread. So if you are on a 445 or on an accounting calendar versus just a regular calendar year, then it will base it on your calendar that you've selected when you created the app. So if you create the app and you say, I'm a 445 company, and all three of those cells were blank, and I put 1,000 in, it's not going to put 333, 333, 333. It's going to actually spread them out based on the 445 calendar. So the answer is you don't have to tell it how to do that unless you're building the application, and you'll tell it at the very beginning. So the end user doesn't need to know that. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, any other questions before we keep going? All right, so let's go start looking at expenses, because revenue is the easy part, right? Now we have to go look at all of our different operating expenses. Because while we can do unit times average selling price for revenue, because that's simple, OpEx is never that simple, right? We can't just say, for headcount it might be close to that simple, but for everything else, we have to go figure out what percentage of math that we're budgeting for different things. So this is where planning gets really interesting and helpful. In Essbase, if we want to figure this out, we have to, again, kind of use VBA and code inside of an Excel doc that lets us do pick lists and things like that. Well, planning is a lot smarter than that. So Essbase is data only. It's dollars and cents. It's units and margins. But inside of planning, we have the concept of actually being able to do a drop-down list. So for advertising, I can say, hey, what's the driver I'm going to use to determine how much money we're going to be allowed to spend on advertising? Is it a percent of revenue? Is it some driver based on units? Or number of sales calls, trips? So we have different options here. So if we do percentage of revenue, we say, okay, what percentage of revenue is it? Well, we're going to spend 1% of our revenue on advertising, and that's the number that's going to get fed through. For other metrics, we may have more than just the driver. So we may say for square footage, I don't just want to do it based on this year's square footage. Maybe I want to do it based on last year's actual square footage. Or maybe I want to do it on the current year planned square footage. So we can build a lot of flexibility into the way that it does these calculations to try and help our planners have to do less math on their own. And this goes back to how do we centralize the way that we calculate things so that the end users can have some control over things, but not have too much control that they get lost in the weeds of trying to do too much, and try and control too many different aspects of their plan. And then once we define those drivers, then it's going to naturally take our revenue or our square footage or our units, and it's going to naturally apply those so that we can get a fully baked income statement with OpEx and everything. So let's go to CapEx and see a couple of other cool features. So if we look at land or vehicles or furniture or machinery and equipment, computers and software, if I come in and I'm trying to budget out that I have 5 new people that are going to start, I need 5 new computers, and I want to put in more detail than this allows. Well, all I get is computers and software. Well, that's not real detailed if I'm trying to go in and put more information into that. So instead, what I can do is I can right click and say, well, I think I just locked it. Let me unlock that. I can right click on this and say, you know what, I want to use supporting detail. And the concept of supporting detail allows us to go in and add multiple lines of information into a single intersection in our S-Space cube. So in S-Space, when we look at our intersections, all I can store is one number in one intersection, right? That's all I get. And that's fine for a lot of things, but I don't want to build an S-Space model that says, you know, I've got computers, and then underneath computers I've got laptops. And then next to laptops I've got Microsoft Windows and Microsoft Office and this, that, and the other, all the different things that we have to put into those numbers that go in. So maybe I want to just say, I've got 5 laptops, I'm going to put them in specifically at the cost that I know they're going to be. So I'm going to have a $2,000 laptop, and then I'm going to add another one. Well, one more time. Yeah. Well, and the cool part about it is when we add one of these, what you'll notice is we can add a child to the one that we're on, or we can add a sibling. What that means is that we can actually build hierarchies inside of our supporting detail. So I don't just have to say, I can put laptops as a parent and list out the 5 laptops. Then I can put software as a parent and list out the 5 pieces of software. So and it'll subtotal those up, or it'll do math, so that I can actually say, I'm going to say, here, I have this many laptops. It is, but we get to centralize it and we can still report on it. So maybe I'm just going to say I'm buying laptops. And then I'm going to say laptop cost. And instead of doing a plus, I'm going to say times. So maybe I need to buy 2,000 new laptops. One of my clients just spun off from their parent company and literally had to buy every single employee a brand new laptop. I don't want to go put in 6,000 laptops. So instead, I'm just going to say I need 2,000 laptops and they're $1,000 a piece. So now when I put that in, it's going to say, okay, that's going to cost me $2 million, and save that directly into the database. The other thing you're going to notice is it's now highlighted in blue, or some greenish color if it's on the projector. And that color is going to tell us that there is supporting details. So we're not only storing that information, but we're also giving the end users an indicator of additional information being present. So then I might even go further than that and say, you know what, that's a pretty big number of laptops that I have to buy. That's $2 million. I probably need to explain that a little bit more. So I can go in and say, you know, I'm going to add a comment to that. And my comment, and I have had clients come in here and use comments for the purposes of literally having a dialogue between 2 different users. A user comes in and says, I'm doing this, and another user comes in and says, no, you're not. So laptops for everyone. You all get a laptop. Yes?
Is there a way to pull back the supporting detail information in SmartView?
In SmartView, yes, and when we get to the SmartView portion, I'll actually show you that. But yeah, the question is, can you pull this information from SmartView? And absolutely.
But the easy way, not that just have a triangle.
So you still have to go in this way to see that information in SmartView. The difference is I can take supporting detail and put it into a financial report. So I can put in a financial report and say, here are my intersections. Also, it'll give me an addendum that has all the supporting detail that make up any cells in that report that have supporting detail. It does. It tells you the intersection and tells you where they are. So the question would become, how would we display that differently in Excel? And that's the challenge. There's not really a good way, interface-wise, to take the supporting detail and put it into the spreadsheet itself. At least they haven't come up with one yet. Maybe we can talk to Oracle about that, but it doesn't exist today. I thought I saw another question up here. Mm-hmm. You can put it in, it just goes in the same methodology. So when I go to a cell, I have to click supporting detail, it's going to open up a new window and I have to type it in. But yes, all of that does exist inside of SmartView. It just won't be in the sheet. And when we get there, it'll make a lot more sense. And I'm going to have to speed up a little because we're down to about 15 minutes. So it's going to show who made the comments, what time they made the comments, and what the actual comment is. One of the last things that we can do, we can also attach a document to this. So this is one of the differentiators between the cloud and on-prem. On-prem, I can put a link to a file, but I have to have a place to store the file, whether it's a SharePoint site or something, and then somebody has to have access to that file. Inside of the cloud, and I'm hoping this changes for on-prem at some point, I can actually upload a file and have it live inside of the cloud. So now I don't have to have a place to store that file. That file just lives in that cell of information so that I can download it and see it, which is a pretty nice thing. You could just put your Excel spreadsheet on there, and now you just download the spreadsheet if you want to go print it off or something. Yeah, no, it's definitely nice that way. And then finally, if we go over to our planned operating expenses, you can kind of see here's all the drivers that we used. Here's the number that ended up making up, and then it gives you the option to do an override. So that we're not just bound as an end user by saying, hey, here are all the rates that you're going to have to use. What if I have an adjustment that I need to make that just doesn't fit inside that bucket? This gives us the opportunity to do that. So, and the goal is to make the system as flexible as we can without it being too complex. And that's kind of a fine line we have to find. But if we find it, it can make it for a really good application that users really enjoy using. So the override is here under adjustment. So I can actually say I'm going to adjust the rate. So I can adjust the rate, or I can adjust the number that's actually in there. So it actually lets me adjust it either way. Yes? There is actually a cache. Yes, you can. These buttons are in PBCS. These buttons are customizable. So you get to go in and say, I'm going to make. It's called a navigation flow, and I can go in and create as many of those buttons as I want. They have a variety of different icons that I can pick and choose from. But that functionality has not made it into on-prem yet. So navigation flows themselves only exist in PBCS today. Oh, absolutely. And somewhere over here under financial statements. So a form doesn't just have to be an input method. It can also be a reporting method. It's great for saying, here's what our P&L should look like, and getting to see that inside of Excel easily as a starting point for how you might do analysis. And if you'll look over here on this tab, you'll see we have cash flow. And there's a cash flow. Does that answer your question? There's a cash flow. See, I had that ready. Thank you, Oracle, for making this for me. No, this is a cash flow built inside of planning. And planning from a cash flow perspective, if you look at what most cash flows are, it's start with net income and layer in all your balance sheet accounts, right? And then you might have components about roll forwards and movement and things like that. But Essbase can easily handle that stuff too. So it doesn't just have to live inside of HFM or inside of FCCS. I have clients that choose not to use HFM for that just because they do a lot of their reporting not out of HFM but out of the other applications. And rather than try and maintain complex cash flow logic in two different languages, business rules / FCCS, which kind of does cash flow, versus planning where I get complete flexibility and I can do it in one language and just maintain it there and do all of my reporting out of that one location. So it's actually pretty common to see cash flow done inside of planning in Essbase. The comments can go in at any level. The supporting detail has to go in at lower levels. And there's another way to enter comments that we'll look at that also requires a level 0 input, but it's a little bit more flexible and visible, which may also answer some of your supporting detail concerns as well. And we'll look at that in a few minutes. No, this is just a regular report. The reports in FR will be right after dashboards. So we're going to do dashboards next, and then we'll go do reports in FR, and then we're going to go take a look at. This is just another form. So this is just an input form that's read-only. So I can drill into this just like a regular form, and everything you see here is all form-based. So it's. It depends on this particular one. Everything is done by a business rule first, and then eventually gets stored. And this is just a report that pulls stored members. But yes, it was all built by a routine that went through and determined all. It may actually be dynamic calcs for this cash flow. I don't remember. And we're down to about 11 minutes, so I'm gonna keep going. No, it's okay. Questions are good because if I just sit up here and talk all day, that's not good for anybody. What's that? That is a good point. So if you guys want to keep going, the only thing that you're going to bump up against is my wife who's waiting for me to get on an airplane. That's up to you guys. That's a good point. See you guys. So this is just an example of a dashboard. We don't have to spend a ton of time on this. The goal here is to just kind of show you that we have a lot of different visualization types. So we have line graphs, bar graphs, pie charts, and gauges. Gauges are one of the newer ones so we can actually do real KPIs and real data that we're pulling in from planning for executive viewership, right? So it's not just for our end users. The other cool part is because I have a point of view and I can see things based on my point of view and based on security, I can send this exact same dashboard out at any level in the organization and just have it mean different things to different people, which is cool. Because again, our goal of trying to get this much to maintain but give us this much functionality is what planning can really do well. So we're going to talk about reports next, and reports come in three flavors. You can either see them in HTML, so just like a live report that's on the web. You can see them as a PDF, or you can download them into Excel. So we're going to go down and look at just an income statement and look at actual versus plan. And there's no point of view, and that's just telling us that this report's going to load without us having to select anything. So we're going to load that one up, and it's going to show us a basic financial report. So how many of you have financial reports in some other application today? So a lot of you. And see, I can see the hands getting lower down and lower down as the session goes on because you're ready to go to the party. But the cool part about this is we can make drillable reports. So it doesn't just have to be a static report. Now, when we convert this to a PDF, it's going to take the drillable report and blow it all the way out and put that into the PDF. But we have a lot of flexibility to make these really interactive and really live. And hopefully, if you have a really good report developer, they'll look better than this. But at least you can kind of see there are different formatting options. You can put your logo in there and have a little bit of fun with it. The last thing we're going to look at before, yes? You can burst them, but you can't burst them? Interesting. I can't say I've ever actually tried to burst one of those. So. Interesting. They haven't changed FR since 1997, so it's probably still that way. I got a couple laughs on that one. So. All right, so let's look at approvals. So for approvals, by default, your approvals are going to be done by your entity dimension. And you can layer in other dimensions, but we're going to keep it simple. And so I'm Henry. You'll see Henry's picture there. That's not me with the tie. And Henry has both sales east and all of sales. So he's going to see all the different sales regions that are out there. And what that means as an owner of all of those at the parent level, I can actually go through and say, you know what, Carol's on vacation. I want to take ownership and send that over to myself. And now I can go modify her data and submit it for approval to my boss. So if I go look at my own, then I can go look at it and say, okay, well, what does that approval path actually look like? Oh, my Flash player is not working. We'll look at that later. But basically, it's going to show the entire path that gets us there. The cool part about approvals and planning is, number one, I can make them contingent on things like whether or not a form has passed a test that says, hey, if this is more than 10%, don't let you submit it for approval. So I can put in things that'll keep me from submitting things just as kind of a check before we bother with somebody having to reject it back. And then when I reject it back, I can reject it back to the person who owns it. I can take ownership. The other cool part about it is when a certain criteria is met, I can actually alter the approval path to go to somebody else. So this can be pretty complex or it can be really simple. It doesn't really matter. So that's it for the web, and for the last 7 minutes, I'm going to go over to SmartView and kind of take a look at what these things look like over in SmartView. So SmartView does have some limitations. So when we look at the web, we can do all the things we saw, and when we look at SmartView, we can probably do the answer used to be 95%, but they've added so much to the web around dashboarding and some of the visualizations and things that number's probably gone down to about 85% that I can do inside of SmartView. And they're working on that functionality, and it's coming. But SmartView gets updated every 3 to 6 months, so I think we're going to get there faster than we do for a lot of things. So you're going to see a tiny little login screen that you probably can't read. That's because we're on the cloud. So this will look a little different than your typical login, and I'm going to log in again as Henry. The cloud login, yeah, well, and what you can't see, it looks just like the login we went through earlier. You give it your identity domain, which tells you I'm using this company, and then you put in your username and password. So, and it's tiny, so I'm gonna have to.
And zooming doesn't help with that.
Not on this. It helps on the web, but it will not help inside of Smart 2 itself because it just doesn't scale like that. So when we click our drop down, instead of seeing Hyperion Planning or Hyperion Financial Management, we see EPM Cloud. If you can read that, then you have really good eyes. When we click on that, we can expand out our list of things, and we'll see the application that's called Vision, and then we'll see all of our forms, all of our plan types, and task lists. So we can go into a task list and go into one of our forms, and task lists are very similar to navigation flows. The goal behind a task list is to really just direct users through a process. So I can link each one of these steps to a specific form, and when they click on it, it opens that form, and I can say I'm done with it and move on to the next one. And as an administrator, I can actually say, what do I do with this task? Who's completed their task list and who hasn't? So it's a way of getting users through the system, especially if you're doing an annual plan that people do once a year. It's really nice to have that reminder of how do I get through this process without somebody having to produce some big document. So let's go to review actual versus plan. And what you're going to see on this one is, this is where we start to see some of the power of planning versus just Essbase, and even things like HFM. So when we look inside of Essbase, all we can do is numbers, right? We can do a little bit of text lists and things like that, but that's about it. Instead, we get the ability inside of planning to have text-based members. And what that means is that I can actually come in here and say, you know what, my advertising budget is 15.6%, maybe I need to put in a comment. Or you'll notice this one's highlighted in red, and it sees that my actual versus plan is a huge differential, and it requires, and it says, hey, you must enter an explanation for any variance that's negative greater than 10%. So it forces the end users to give us feedback that we can then report on. The cool part is the commentary is actually in Excel. It's in SmartView. It's in the report if we go through financial reports. So unlike supporting detail and things like that that are a little bit obfuscated through different menus and things like that, we see it right there in front of us. So we can say, postage went up. That's our comment. That's a great comment, by the way. And we can submit that. And now we have that in there, so if we run a report, we'll see that. I had two questions at once. So first question is, where does it store that? It stores that in the relational repository. So we have that relational component that gives us a whole lot more flexibility in planning that we don't have in Essbase. It is not a linked reporting object. It really exists, and when you do a financial report or anything else, it acts and looks the same way. So you can see it across the board. What was the second question? Yes, it is. So text members have actually existed since 11.121-ish. I don't know. It's somewhere in that vicinity. And there's actually other types of members as well. So you've got text lists, you've got smart lists, which are the drop-down lists that we saw earlier when we were selecting drivers. And you can also have dates. So if you want to force the user to use a specific date, you can actually have a date-based input, which is nice if you're doing start dates for new employees and things like that. So now let's go over to a familiar form from earlier. So this is where we went in, and if you'll remember, we were in Sales East, and we changed our first one to January to 300 units, and we changed quarter 2 to 1,000. So first thing is, yay, we get the same data if we go to Excel or if we go to online. So that's a nice feature. The second thing that we can do is we can go in here and actually start looking at and creating our own sets of additional actions. So our comments can be in here, our supporting detail can be in here, and we can even see the history of a cell to see if that cell changed. And the history thing is pretty darn cool, because now if Bob says, no, I didn't make that $400, I don't know who did that. No, Bob, you did that. Because I've had users tell me they didn't do it. I don't know if you guys, who's ever experienced that? Yeah, yeah, so Bob can't do that anymore. We've got Bob. We know what Bob did. And that's a pretty cool functionality, and that actually works on the web as well. I just didn't get a chance to show it over there. It will track any value that goes in. The comments themselves, like if you put a comment on a cell, is tracked in a separate area, but you can see every comment. So when the comment gets added or deleted, there's actually a table inside of planning that will literally let you audit any action inside of the tool. So that's one benefit in on-prem versus on PBCS. In PBCS, there are some reporting around that, but if you want to really see every little auditable action, I can turn all the auditing on in on-prem, and there will be a giant table out there that will say that Bob sneezed at the keyboard. I mean, it is really detailed. He entered a comment. He deleted a comment. Everything you could imagine can be put into that audit log. Another thing that we can do, and this kind of comes down to maybe I want to enter data at an upper level, but I don't want it to spread a certain way. So the question earlier was, did the user have to say anything? Well, no, they don't have to, but they can. So what I can do is I can actually go in here and do a grid spread on quarter one and say, you know what, I want to increase quarter one, and I want to do either a proportional spread, or maybe I want to actually do an even split. So instead of me spreading this value, maybe I just want the same value, but I need it even across all my months. When I spread this, it's going to say now 969 divided by 3, and it's going to put in equal numbers into all of them. So the user doesn't have to give us feedback, but they can. The cool part about a grid spread is it'll work on any dimension at any level. So it will take whatever level we put it in the form, and it will spread it all the way down to level 0, which is where we have to input data inside of planning. So that's a pretty powerful feature. Another powerful feature we have, and again, these all work on the web as well, we can also do just an adjustment. So how many times have you gone into a form and said, you know what, I need to kick this up 10%. So you take 10 cells, you copy them, you put them into another cell, you put in 0.1, and you times all of them by 0.1, and then you copy the number and you put it back in. I do that a lot if I don't have planning. Yeah, exactly, times 1.1, because you don't want to do that. That's a good point. So maybe instead we just want to increase the cells that we've selected by 10%. So now when I adjust the data, all of them went up 10%. So everything I selected. So that's a pretty cool feature as well. And we can adjust that and have it do all kinds of things. We can either add a fixed value to all of them. We can subtract a fixed value. We can multiply and divide it by a specific number. So if we want to double it, you can go in and say times 2. So a lot of this is some of the basic functionality in planning that gets overlooked a lot that is really powerful for end users. And we are officially 1 minute over. So I'm happy to keep going for about 5 more minutes, and then like somebody said, I have to go home to my wife. So I would like to not be dead when I get there. So any questions? We're kind of to the Q&A stage. Yes. Sure. So the question is, what's the difference between a calc script and a business rule? So a calculation script is something we create in Essbase that will execute on a finite amount of information, but it's always the same when I execute it. Now in 11.124, they've added the ability to parameterize a calc script so that it's a little bit more flexible, but that functionality is a little bit half-baked. In a business rule, however, a business rule is, number one, it's parameterized, so I can say, based on what I get from the end users, it will do certain things. But number two, a business rule is planning aware, so that it understands that on this form that I've selected Sales East and I've selected product X. So when I run it, it automatically knows those things, and I don't have to tell it as an end user to calculate for that region. In a calc script, even if I have a parameterized calc script, I have to tell it what to do. A business rule, I don't. A business rule just kind of runs in the background and hums along, and nobody really knows what it's doing, but it's awesome. Okay, I had 2 more questions up here. Yes?
Why do we still have to buy Essbase?
The question is, do we still have to buy Essbase if we buy planning to sit on top of Essbase? That is a complex answer. So on the cloud, no, because it's all part of the same system. On-prem, if you're going to do BSO only plan types, then you do not have to purchase an additional Essbase license. It's all included, and you can use it for planning purposes only. If, however, you want to use either ASO plan types or hybrid technology, you are required to purchase a full-use Essbase license. This used to be nebulous territory, but they have updated the actual licensing document from Oracle about 6 months ago that took the nebulous away and said you must buy it if you do hybrid or ASO. So yes or no is the answer. Maybe? Okay, yes. Does anybody use project financial planning? At least one client, the one that Oracle built it for before they turned it into a product, uses project financial planning. Because that's how these products all come to existence. Somebody that bought a ton of licenses really needed it, so Oracle went and built it. The answer, we have a few clients that have used it, and the problem with project financial planning, it suffers similar fate to workforce planning in that I very seldom fit inside the box that Oracle has given me. And when I start to color outside the lines, when I start to get out of that box, it costs me a fortune in consulting dollars to go rework it. Somebody did, probably 3 years ago, did a presentation at Kaleidoscope on comparing workforce planning to project financial planning. Because in workforce planning, if you update something, add a dimension, for instance, very simple. If you add a dimension to workforce planning, you have to go update roughly 5,000 lines of code, was the analysis that they had done. If you do that in project financial planning, you have to update roughly 15,000 lines of code. Because project financial planning touches workforce planning and it touches CapEx planning. So it's not just project financial planning. So the answer is most clients don't use it because it costs too darn much to implement it. Unless you're willing to change your business process to fit inside of the box that Oracle gives us. And frankly, not too many clients are willing to do that. Okay? Well, and you actually have a very good point. If you're looking at on-prem, I have a crap load of stuff I have to go modify. If you're looking at the way that they do it on cloud, it's actually totally different. If I want to add a dimension on cloud, I check the box that says add a dimension to it. So using it on the cloud is actually a lot more appetizing for most clients because workforce planning, I can add a dimension, sure, check the box on every dimension you'd like to add, and it automatically updates the business rules and calc scripts on the back end so that we don't have to. So that's made it a lot more appetizing to use a lot of the out-of-the-box functionality. I have a lot of clients that want to use the workforce module that's built in, whereas on-prem, they never even would have thought about it. But they've changed the flexibility of the model a lot as they've taken it to the cloud. And workforce planning on the cloud looks completely different than it does on-prem. Same thing for project financial planning, same thing for CapEx. Any other questions before my wife kills me? Yes.
So workforce planning, CapEx, whatever, I don't think those are necessary. You could build an application.
You can always build an application. That's absolutely true.
Yeah, they build things for you to do all this stuff. You could do your business rule. That's what I think. And a lot of these other products I just don't see.
So on-prem, one of the big purposes around having a workforce plan type, I tell all my clients if they're going to do workforce planning, buy the workforce plan type. Not because we're going to implement it, but because I have a finite number of BSO plan types that I can support inside of an application. I get 3. Whether it's on the cloud or on-prem. Unless I want to start having multiple applications or multiple pods on the cloud, I only get 3. So now I have 3 that I can fit into. If one of those is workforce, I've taken up one, if I custom build it. If one of those is my income statement, I've taken another one up, and now I have an operational model. I'm out. I'm done. So there's definitely a benefit to owning especially the on-prem one, because when I set it up, I don't have to initialize it. I don't ever have to create all the muck that I have to sift through to build it. I can just leave it alone and build it the way I want to build it. For $300 a user, that's a 10% upcharge. I'll take it. See, and the AV man's wife is in this city. You might have to worry about that person.